Have you lost the connection with your higher self? Are you noticing the dis-ease of the outside world? It's time to reconnect with nature and each other and raise our consciousness, vibration, and frequency. Together we can create a world of peace and abundance. It's Spiritual Revolution Radio with your host, Dr. Will Miller.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Will Miller with the Life by Design Institute. Today, I'm with Dr. Dawson Church. Dawson is an award-winning health science writer. He has several books that he's collaborated on, edited, and written himself. In fact, he has 3 best-selling books, some of which we're going to talk about today. He's conducted dozens of clinical trials and founded the National Institute of Integrative Healthcare. And he uses this organization to promote groundbreaking new treatments. In fact, that organization has a large program called the Veterans Stress Project, and it offers free treatment for PTSD. And I think it's been over 20,000 veterans now, maybe even more than that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes too. But Dawson, welcome to the show.
Well, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You've lived quite a journey in your life. As I was reading through your many websites, and I ordered your book today, by the way, Bliss Brain today. I ordered it. But give us kind of a brief history of what's led to where you're at in your life, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, my real problems began, Will, with my ancestors 100,000 years ago.
We don't have that long of a show.
Time you have. And the reason I say that is because 100,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, our ancestors survived by focusing relentlessly on what was wrong. And psychologist Carl Rogers said it's called finding the blemish. We notice what's bad in our environment, and that's the brain's negativity bias, and that's what helped our ancestors survive 100,000 years ago. So my ancestor 100,000 years ago had a gene mutation that helped her spot the tiger in the grass a nanosecond quicker than the tribe's person next to her. She escaped, the other person got eaten, and so that gene mutation allowed her to survive. She passed it to her offspring, and then they passed it to their offspring, and over and over and over again, repeat by thousands of generations. And here you've got people like me. And so I began my life as a teenager really depressed, anxious, PTSD, miserable, stressed. And Mother Nature looks at people like that and thinks, they'll spot the tiger. Isn't that grand? But of course, it does nothing for your happiness. And so I began unhappy. I joined a spiritual community. When I was 15 years old, I studied the perennial philosophy that underlies all religions. I learned to meditate, learned energy healing, got a little bit happier over the years, studied psychology, went into book publishing. And then I finally made a commitment when I was 45 years old. I was really struggling at that time. I had 2 small kids. I was a part-time dad and really having a difficult time. And I said, I'm going to meditate from today, every single day. And I talk about that moment in Bliss Brain when everything began to change in my life. I discovered energy therapies after that. It was more than 20 years ago. And I really found my life began to improve drastically within a year. Money improved, relationships improved. And eventually I had this huge insight that when we feel good, when we have elevated emotional and spiritual states, something's going on in our body. I did several studies of cortisol, and we found that cortisol was dropping when you're in those elevated states. And I had this huge aha moment. If cortisol is dropping, then the genes that code for the synthesis of cortisol must be being downregulated. And so I wrote this book, The Genie in Your Genes, became a bestseller, sold over 100,000 copies. And that just was the start of this career of discovery. I then turned my attention to PTSD, started the Veterans Stress Project with a whole bunch of therapists and coaches, began to offer these techniques to veterans who were suffering from all the stuff I'd suffered from as a teenager, flashbacks and nightmares, intrusive thoughts, and then really began to trace how we can not only solve the trauma problem, solve the PTSD problem, which we all have, that ancestral pattern we have from 100,000 years ago, of finding the blemish, finding what's wrong, the negativity bias, pulling ourselves out of that, and then moving in the kind of elevated states that Rumi and Hafiz and St. Catherine and all these great masters talk about. So that's kind of a 100,000 years of how I came to write Bliss Brain.
Well, let's say in that 100,000 years, let's go to this lifetimes. And let's talk about, and I'm going to come back to the cortisol thing that you were saying a second ago, but I know you've authored several books. So I want to know, out of those books, which one really was the one that said, this is changing my direction. This is where I'm going and what I'm doing. What was that book?
It was The Genie in Your Genes, because I was primarily in the career of book publishing. I was a publisher. I wasn't the guy who wrote books. I felt I had nothing really valuable to say. Like I was working with Bruce Lipton, who wrote the book of The Biology of Belief, very closely on that book, on getting it out there, getting it published. And so that was my career for 20, 25 years. And so to have this insight and then to realize, aha, I can put these ideas together. I can integrate these ideas, write about them. And I knew that idea was circulating in the field out there, that our spiritual experiences, our emotions are affecting gene expression. And I thought, I'll be really mad if I look at Amazon one day and see there a book called The Genie in Your Genes, written by Greg Braden. I said, I'm gonna grab this idea and I'm gonna run with it myself, and I did. And then that was the origin. That was a life-changing thing. I began this whole new career of public speaking and really putting out the vision there of the possibility of not just psychological change, but radical physical improvement as we take care of our psyches and our emotions.
And of course, Bruce Lipton, he could have written that book too, The Genie in Your Genes, being heavy into epigenetics like he is. So it's a good thing you got it out there.
Yeah.
Bliss Brain, I want to talk about it and kind of move to it. And then you had talked about in that book states that kind of remodel our brain happiness. I think you referred to them as flow states. I knew it would come to me. So as flow states. So kind of tell us what a flow state is and what that process is that you're talking about in that new book. Or that.
Yeah, and this is so powerful to realize that not only can we be in flow states occasionally, but we can actually trigger flow states deliberately. And so a flow state is that moment when you lose track of space and time. You're so focused on the task at hand. You're in a state of enjoyment and focus, and your thoughts and your intentions and your whole mental state merges with action. So it's that moment you're hiking through the woods and suddenly you become aware of the beauty of nature and you feel one with the cosmos and you're in this flow state. Maybe you're exercising, maybe like I love mountain biking and kayaking and all kinds of other activities like that. And there are times when I just lose myself in the scenery and I'm in this blissful flow state. I'm writing sometimes and I'm in that flow state. In fact, I rarely write unless I first am in that flow state. So we all hit those elevated states at times. The big discovery of the last 30 years, starting with Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who really defined flow, is that we can induce those flow states. And there are two ways to do it. One is through those peak experiences, those mountaintop experiences. The other one is meditation. And so in Bliss Brain, I write about those two avenues into flow. And the most reliable way is meditation. And so I've been looking at all the neuroscience behind this, as well as doing quite a bit of research using EEGs and MRIs myself to actually help guide people into these flow states. And then notice what you mentioned, neural remodeling there. And I just want to take a deep breath and say those words again. Neural remodeling, neural remodeling. It is so exciting. We're literally changing the anatomy of our brains with our minds. We're changing the hardware with the software. I mean, how absolutely astonishingly, amazingly cool is that? That neural plasticity is kicking in as we have these elevated states. In Bliss Brain, I have many case histories. One case history of one guy who began an 8-week meditation mindfulness quest. But before he did, he was a TV journalist. So he took his whole crew with him into an advanced imaging laboratory, and they did this microscopic scan of every single part of his brain, measuring the volume of tissue in every single structure in his brain. He then began to do mindfulness meditation, a lot calmer, became a lot happier. 8 weeks later, only 8 weeks later, went back into the lab, and parts of his brain anatomically, the anatomy of his brain had changed, and one part of his brain had grown by 22.8%, a tiny little sliver of tissue in the center of the brain called the dentate gyrus that regulates emotion brain-wide. It regulates your irritation and your annoyance and your fear and your anger and your resentment and your blame and shame, and it's just responsible for keeping you calm. That part of his brain, that little sliver, it's about the size of my little fingernail over here, that little sliver of tissue that regulates emotion grew by 22.8% in 8 weeks. I mean, how remarkable is that? That our minds and our spiritual experiences are literally changing the anatomy, the very structure of our brains.
Well, and of course, you're talking about neuroplasticity, where as they used to believe that we couldn't change it as we got older. It'd be too late for you and I now, but they've since found that that's not true at all, and we can change it. But they've always taught that can happen over a course of maybe months and really years.
Yes.
But you found something different, right? In your book, as I read through the little bit I did. So,
yeah.
So tell us what that is, like, because
colleagues and. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can just kind of tell us what that is and why it's different and what you found, that would be wonderful.
Well, the big contribution neuroscience is making to meditation and elevated states is that it's rigorous, and we're learning to map them and we're learning to replicate them. And so we put now in various studies many Tibetan monks, many Franciscan nuns, many adepts through these processes, map their brain states. We know which regions are active, which brain waves are active, and we know what those look like. And we now are able to train people to move into those states really quickly. And those states are unbelievably pleasurable. They are filled with activity in parts of the brain that process reward, like the dopamine system, that process feelings of contentment, like serotonin, that produce the bliss molecule, anandamide. So we have all of these neurochemicals in our brains, and our brains are functioning that way. And the cool thing about this process is that now that we've mapped the brains of all these adepts, we're able to show ordinary people how to do this. And in the first chapter of Bliss Brain, I have one section called From 50 Years to 50 Seconds, because at a recent retreat, a live retreat, the last one before COVID hit, we had people in a retreat center for 7 days, and people initially took a while to hit those elevated states. By day 7, one woman in 47 seconds hit the same level of brain function as a Zen master who'd been meditating for 40 years. And in only 7 days, she learned that. So now the exciting thing is it doesn't take 10,000 hours, does not take going into a convent or a monastery or going and putting yourself under the discipline of a spiritual order. You can learn to do this stuff and then go and apply it at work, with your kids, and anywhere you happen to find yourself. So that's the really big breakthrough now, is people are discovering these things, and the neuroscience allows us to hone in and see which practices are effective. A lot of meditation practices, like the ones I learned at 15, are completely useless. The instructions I got from the meditation teacher, I never could still my mind, never could even sit still. So when you use effective practices that neuroscience shows work, then you rapidly start that state change, and then that triggers brain remodeling.
And you're talking like this happens with most of the people that you're teaching? Does it happen with just a few? You say after 7 days, this particular woman was able to just jump right into that state. Is that kind of extraordinary, or is that ordinary?
It's ordinary if you use certain evidence-based techniques. And that's why being evidence-based is so important. People have a lot of ideas, and wherever you go in every area of life, people will say, oh, I tried this, I think this is good. And so we've got a whole bunch of people who have great hypotheses, but all my books are all about, what does science say? What does science really tell us is effective? Right. And it turns out in meditation, there are certain things that are extremely effective and other things that are not effective. And I'm so sorry, people in saffron robes with 108 prayer beads around your neck, but the saffron robes and the prayer beads are not going to cut it. And trying to still your mind is pretty much impossible, because that was what got you eaten 100,000 years ago. So how do you do this without all those trappings? And that's why neuroscience shows you what to do. You have to use effective meditation, and there are only a few things that are effective. All the rest is just window dressing.
Well, that's good to know. So tell us then, tell us about that meditation. What can we do? What are those things?
No way, Will. You have to buy my book.
I just did.
Actually, you can buy it for free at blissbrain.com, because the publisher gave us a whole bunch of books at cost, so we're giving them away free at blissbrain.com. But when you get a copy of the book and you go through the meditations, there are 8 free meditations that come with the book, and they're practices drawn from heart math, from neurofeedback, from self-hypnosis, from acupressure, from mindfulness, and then they're combined into a little 7-step routine. And when people try this routine, like one woman called Toni Tomlinson wrote into us, we have tons of fan mail from people who try this, and she said that when I sat down to try this meditation the very first time, I'm stressed out, I'm burned out on motherhood and life, my cortisol is sky high 99% of the time. I'm so stressed. I've failed at meditation before. And when I sat down to do these 7 little routines of yours, my mind said to me, Toni, you're wasting your time. You'll fail at this, as certainly as you fail at every other meditation technique. And she says, when I hit step 3, and I began to do the breathing, suddenly I was in bliss, and tears of ecstasy began to flow down my cheeks as I was in that place I've longed to be for all this time. So that's her quote. And there are so many people now who've learned, if you just do these 7 steps, the simple things, like one of them, just for example, is relaxing your tongue on the floor of your mouth. These are all physiological cues that you can use to tell your body to go into this deep relaxation state. Under your tongue, in the middle of your tongue, there's a nerve called the hypoglossal nerve. It feeds into the vagus nerve, where the vagus nerve then tells your whole body to relax. It's your main relaxation signaling nerve. And so your whole body relaxes, and all you do is relax your tongue. Just a simple little technique, and that sends that signal through your vagus nerve. And if you can try it right now by imagining something that annoys you, and keep your tongue totally relaxed, and try and get upset. I mean, just try this right now, Will.
I'm doing it right now.
Something that annoys you, but keep your tongue relaxed all the time. And if your tongue's relaxed, you just can't get pissed off.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult to actually. It kind of even makes it difficult to think about all the things that were bothering me before I started the show with you today. So that's awesome.
That's right, triggering the vagus nerve. So very simple exercise. 1 of 7 in the book.
So you talk about this in Bliss Brain, but I know you you have another program, Eco Meditation. Is that go along the same lines, or is that a different program, something new you're onto?
Same thing. Eco meditation is just the 7 steps baked into a little routine you just use, and then there are flavors of eco meditation. Like one theme of a particular eco meditation might be, we build in affirmations, might be feeling one with the universe, it might be feeling inner peace. There are eco meditations to help you connect with others. There's one really cool one. We did 2 studies of immunity. This is going back 3 or 4 years, and one was a weekend study, one was a 1-week study. But we found that when people did eco meditation and acupressure stress release, the thing we did with all these veterans, we found that when they did that for a weekend, their cortisol dropped significantly, and their level of antibodies, immunoglobulin antibodies, rose significantly. When they did it for a week, their cortisol dropped 37%. Their immune antibodies rose 114%. And these antibodies are the things that protect you from coronaviruses. They neutralize the spike protein. They also protect you from bacteria. So these immune antibodies are really important. And so you can look these up in a medical journal. It's called the Journal of Evidence-Based Integrative Medicine. And you can see those primary studies. But this stuff is powerful. So I built that into an eco meditation that focuses on immunity. And that's what I really encourage people to use at this time to really boost your immunity. And again, the evidence shows from those 2 studies that you can do it. It doesn't take more than a weekend of practice to dramatically raise your level of immunoglobulins.
So, and that's a practice you say to raise your immunity. Where can people find that when we're talking about
That is available at a website called Dawson Gift, just my name, DAWSON, gift.com. You get a bunch of other things there, but that's the most important one, is that immunity boosting meditation, again, it's free, is at dawsongift.com.
I appreciate that. I'm going to go do that after the show. I didn't see that one as I was doing all the research. You have so many pages that have information about you. The research came pouring in. So I do want to kind of go back to the Bliss Brain and the whole meditation practice and what you've been doing with your groups and your research, and talk a little bit about people may be wondering exactly what kind of things are you helping. I know obviously PTSD you're an expert at and have helped people there, but what to tell some of the things you're doing for these people that are showing up.
So you have to do two things to grow. There's a project at Harvard called the Adult Development Project, and it's been going on since 1938, has enrolled 5 generations of people, and they study, amongst other things, how you grow, how you develop as a human being. And so I draw on that, I draw on other sources, and there are 2 things that are essential. One is you have to solve the trauma piece. You have to get over your ancestor from 100,000 years ago.
Okay.
If you are traumatized and you then climb to the mountaintop, induce these flow states, you do ego meditation, you feel really good, you go into bliss brain, that's all wonderful. But if you were assaulted as a child, if you have unresolved childhood trauma, then research shows that it's going to surface in some way as the dark side, the dark night of the soul. Something is going to be incomplete in you. And so I wish, and again, the belief in years gone by was that we can just transcend all of that stuff. And the PTSD research shows us unequivocally, we cannot. We have to go to the dark basement, exhume those old versions of self, help them heal, integrate them. And so for that, I teach EFT, acupressure tapping. Tapping is the fastest thing I've found. EMDR is great, but you need a therapist to do it. So basically tapping is EMDR by yourself. And so you want to use EFT. That's what we use with the veterans. And it works remarkably well in 6 one-hour sessions. They're free of flashbacks, nightmares, and those other PTSD symptoms. For the most part, 9 out of 10 of them are free. It doesn't always work for everyone, but EFT works great for clearing out the basement and all that trauma. The next thing in your development cycle is reach for the stars. Be as happy as you can be. When we look at the MRI scans of these monks and nuns, they aren't twice as happy as the average person. We're measuring a brainwave called gamma, by the way, to determine how happy they are. It's a good marker for creativity and happiness. And we find in those MRI studies that they're 25 times as happy as the average person. I mean, they're so happy, you can't even imagine it. And of course, they've got all this serotonin and dopamine and anandamide and beta endorphins slushing around their brains. Right. So they're totally stoned and blissed out with all these pleasure molecules. So that's where you want to go. You want to go to these pleasurable states 25 times baseline, but you have to also do the trauma work.
I'm glad you brought that up because I've dealt with a lot of friends and people that I work with PTSD, and that is the case. You have to kind of find that shadowy, dark place, deal with it, and then you can move on and create the happy life. We're down to a little less than a minute. I want you to be able to let everybody know again where we can find you and where we can find your work and get help.
Those are the 2 good places, blissbrain.com for the book, and then dawsongift.com for the immunity meditation. And then if you know a vet, are a vet who has PTSD, or a family member of a vet, go ahead and refer them to the Veteran Stress Project at stressproject.org. That's a great place to go. They can get free treatment there. And again, over 6 randomized controlled trials have shown that in 6 one-hour sessions, their PTSD symptoms are usually way down or often gone.
And that's for family members as well as their vets, right?
Family members as well as vets.
Wow, that's such amazing work. I'm so happy to hear that. I'm going to refer some people to it after the show today. Well, thank you for joining me. We're out of time. We're happy to have you on Spiritual Revolution Radio. We know knowledge is power, and the more knowledge we can give people, the more information we give people to get the help, raise their frequency, change their hearts, their mind, and their soul to live an abundant life, is good. So thank you again for being here.
It's a joy, a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Will Miller. Please check out my website at lifebydesign.institute, or to comment or be on the show with me, please contact me at spiritualrevolutionradio.com. I want to make sure that everyone knows again how to get a hold of Dawson Church. Blissbrain.com is a great place to go. You can get his book there for free. Again, love and peace, everyone. Have a great day.
This has been Spiritual Revolution Radio with Dr. Will Miller. For more information or to be a guest, please visit lifebydesign.institute. Join us next week for another edition of Spiritual Revolution Radio with your host, Dr. Will Miller. This has been a production from a podcast studio.